we talk about EBS, right? Uh, the other day we were talking about EC2 instances. Let's say you have log files that are stored in uh, instance backed store or ephemeral storage. Upon the reboot or upon the stop and start activity, the logs will get clear. Of course, any data on that drive will get clear. If you can find a way programmatically move the data from ephemeral storage to S3 and you archive that, right? So that it's not that you are losing the data nor paying considerable amount of money, right? So when we go to Glacier, you will understand what is the price that you have to pay for it. It's really very, very cheap, right? You'll not believe a storage with 11 nines of durability is offered at that price. You don't believe, right? But yes, you'll understand it later. But the point that I wanted to highlight here is S3 can be programmatically accessed by other services. It can be a service that is from Amazon Cloud, or it can be a service from on-premises, or it can be a service from the other cloud providers. And there are a few points that you always remember. That is, there is something called bucket. We will talk about it. So bucket names have to be unique across your AWS accounts, not just your account, but the entire list of AWS accounts. This is just like the DNS name. If I take ibm.com, if I register that domain, and you cannot do the same, right? You cannot register the same domain. If I book maybe wipro.com, tcs.com, any of those domain names, if a name is already registered and you cannot register the same name. Similarly, the bucket names must be unique across the AWS accounts. If I register a name, if I register a bucket name and you cannot have the same name registered. Of course, you may be having your AWS infrastructure in North Virginia region and I have it in Mumbai region. Irrespective of the locations, irrespective of the accounts, bucket names must be unique. Bucket names always start in lowercase, right? You cannot have a caps, maybe the special characters like at the rate or underscore, colons. You cannot have such special characters. It must always start with the lowercase. And even in between, in the entire bucket name, it is not advised to have the uppercase letters. Buckets can be accessed globally. However, they are still created and located in a given region. For example, Mumbai. Okay. So you can choose to upload data in Mumbai region. However, it can be accessed anywhere on the internet. You just need an internet connectivity. That's all. It's just like Google Drive. When you upload a file into Google Drive, it is stored physically in some location. It's not actually, it is not stored in all the countries of the globe, but it's stored in one location, but can be accessed anywhere on the internet, right? Similar to that, S3, when you upload data, you have to choose to which physical location you wanted to upload. I mean, to which region you wanted to upload. But that can be accessed anywhere on the internet. And then just to go over a small comparison between object level, block level, and file level storage, I believe you guys remember from yesterday that I said the starting point of any storage technology is the hard disk, right? A hard disk. Hard disk can be SATA, it can be SAS, it can be SSD, it can be ATA. There are different types of hard disks based on their performance capabilities. And the pricing, price tag is associated with that based on the performance. So you'll have more than one hard disk, and to overcome the individual hard disk failures, that is to have a fault tolerant environment, you put multiple hard disks into a group and you call that as RAID. And we know that there are different RAIDs like RAID 0, 1, 5, 6, and 10. Okay. And next to the RAID, to deliver this hard disk space to the client that we have here, we'll be having an operating system sitting here. Okay. So this operating system actually does the access control mechanism, and it It helps you. Uh, it helps you access this storage system and create the LUNs, XYZ stuff. So it depends. I mean, different vendors have different operating system. Mostly, it is a customized open source operating system. So, of course, our focus is not to talk about the operating system and functionality, but that part is for the storage administrators. Whoever is getting trained on EMC storage or NetApp, they need to understand the behavior of it and all. But we can generalize this storage here. Right? This is simple operating system which does the access control and which allows you to log into the storage system to control all this RAID configuration, LAN configuration, storage pools, and all that. So next to the operating system, you have to deliver this hard disk space to this machine. So based on the equipment that you use, if it is a fiber channel cable, fiber optic cable and fiber channel switch, and if it is a HBA, host bus adapter, then this is called as SAN. If it is regular TCP/IP, Cat5 cables, a regular Ethernet switch, and if it is a network interface card, this is called a NAS. All right, and SAN delivers you the block storage. We have seen all of this yesterday, and NAS delivers you the file level storage. So the new one, so far, some of you might have gone through the differences between the block storage and the object level storage. Sorry, the block level storage and the file level storage. So differences, the core or the block level storage operates at lower level, that is at a raw hard disk space, right? From the storage system, which is a remote storage, you will be able to deliver the raw hard disk capacity to the client machines so that the client machine can format the hard disk space with any kind of file system and you can make use of it. Yesterday, if you see, it was a EBS volume. So that was a remote storage. You create a EBS volume and you attach it to a EC2 instance. Once we log into the EC2 instance, we are formatted with NTFS file system. It was a Windows server. If it is a Linux-based operating system, it would have been maybe ext3 or ext4 based on your Linux operating system version. Similarly, if you have any x86 operating system, right, you would find a different file system based on the OS that you engage. But the idea that I wanted to highlight here is block level storage is accessing the raw hard disk capacity that we have seen yesterday. That's part of block storage. SAN, iSCSI, FCOE, DAS are the storage technologies that has to offer you the block storage. And when you look at the Amazon cloud, EBS is a storage that has to offer you the block storage. That's clear. It operates at a lower level. Only your operating system can access the block storage devices, not V. But when you look at the file storage, it operates at a higher level protocol, meaning irrespective of the operating system, you still can access the file share, right? You have a Linux operating system, the same file share can be accessed. You have a Windows operating system, the same file share can be accessed. Okay, so here NAS is also a remote remote storage, but the operating system that we talk about, the hard disks, RAID, and the operating system to deliver a protocol. Our operating system already formats the hard disk space with a file system, and then it delivers. It's like you create a folder in your D drive and you share it, and your friends will access that file system, the folder with a shareable URL that you give. Okay, it's just like that. And in a traditional data center, you've got NAS, network attached storage, as a storage system that delivers the NFS or a file share level storage. But when you look at Amazon cloud, there is something called EFS, elastic files storage or file system. This is actually based upon your NFS4 protocol. Those who are familiar with NFS earlier versions, 3 or 2, which are the earlier versions, and the latest version is NFS4, can easily understand this EFS. So the difference between block storage and the file storage is the layers that it operates. Block storage operates at lower level, so that your operating system can access it directly and can format it. Whereas the file storage is actually accessed at a user level or at a operating system level, so that we can access the file share irrespective of the operating system that we are operating off. The third one is object level storage. So S3 is an object level. Remember, none of them are actually groundbreaking technologies. No, EBS, EFS, and S3. None of them are groundbreaking, but they've leveraged those the pillars. Okay, the building blocks. Like I said, block. If block storage is a building block, Amazon leveraged it and offered a service called EBS. Same way EFS, and of course object level storage. Right? So that is S3. So S3 is a cloud object storage. Instead of being closely associated with a server, Amazon S3 storage is independent of the server and accessed over the internet. So for the file storage and block storage, they need to have the connectivity over fiber optic or over TCP/IP networking, and it cannot happen like you have a block storage that is, let's say, EMC SAN in a data center in Mumbai and a server that is in Hyderabad. You cannot have server access a block storage that is in Mumbai. Similarly, you cannot have a file server that is in somewhere North Virginia region and a server that is sitting in North California, and it cannot access the file share. But when it comes to object level storage, there is no such close association. You can have server anywhere, you can have storage anywhere. It can be accessed over the internet. And instead of you storing the data in the form of blocks and files, that is SCSI commands or CFS commands, the data is stored in the form of object. No matter you store image, audio file, video file, exe file, big data file, MDF file, LDF file, no matter what kind of data that you're storing, all that data will be stored in the form of an object. A single file equals to a single object. And you can interact with this object level storage with the REST API calls, the programmatic interface, right? So like I said, this object level storage can be integrated, can be programmatically accessed on premises cloud, that is Amazon cloud or any other cloud platform. You just need to find an API that interacts with that interacts over HTTP or HTTPS protocol, that HTTPS protocol in the REST API call. That's all. Right. So to see the more details about object level storage, let's move forward. The basic features. Maybe try to understand the bucket. Okay, a bucket is a top level object stored in S3. So without we creating a bucket, we cannot do anything. The moment you log into S3 storage, the first thing that we must do is to create a bucket. If I don't create a bucket, and I cannot do anything, I cannot upload a file, I cannot, in simple, there is nothing to do. So bucket is a top level object. And every S3 object is contained in a bucket. So every object that we store, that actually gets stored inside a bucket. And as we understand, bucket names must be unique. It's just like a DNS name. The bucket names are not unique just in your account, but they must be unique on the entire internet, on the entire list of AWS accounts. And your bucket names can contain up to 64 lowercase letters, numbers, hyphens, and periods. And other than these, you cannot have any other special character. You can create and use multiple buckets, up to 100 per account by default. This is a soft limit. 100 buckets per account is a soft limit, and you can any day request Amazon to increase that capping. So, and the next one in the list is the region. Well, we know part of the global infrastructure that we understood. There are 16 regions and 44 availability zones. A region is a physical location. So when you create a bucket, the bucket gets stored into one of those 16 regions. right? Though it stores into one of those 16 regions, you can read or write the data anywhere on the internet. Objects. So just like you understand, objects are files, right? Any data that you store into S3 bucket is called as an object. And objects can store virtually any kind of data in any format. There is no restriction on the file extensions. Like I said, it can be audio, video, or documents, or it can be exe files, it can be MDF files, LDF files, any file it can be. And a single file, a single object can range between 0 bytes to 5 terabyte. This is what capping I said. And a single bucket can store unlimited number of objects. And you do not have to ask Amazon to increase your storage quota or anything of that sort. By default, when you create an AWS account, like you are entitled to use unlimited amount of storage from S3. Okay, if this month you use 20 GB, you pay for 20 GB, and next month you've shifted from 20 GB to 200 petabytes, right? You can do that. You can do that, and you do not have to ask anybody to expand the storage capacity. Nothing as such. By default, you can do it, and you pay for 200 terabytes next month. Sorry, 200 petabytes next month, and the following month you come down to 2 GB. From 200 to 2 GB, you can do that. You only pay for 2 GB for the third month. So based on your usage, you pay it. It's called pay as you go. Yes, Ash.
Hey, so is there anything free with buckets, with the whatever free tier or something, or even if I create one?
Yeah, if you remember the second class that we have done, getting started, that we have gone through the free tier, and there is a 5 GB of S3 storage free forever.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And there is something called keys. Keys are just the identifiers, unique identifiers. So you just have to give a unique key for the buckets and the objects that are inside the bucket. Okay. Other than, that's all. It's just the unique identifier. And then object URL. Well, of course, these are all very small topics, and I try to put them kind of as a single topic, as an individual topic, because from S3 you will see at least 3 questions coming in your certification program, and a question can be about an object, can be about the keys, can be about an object URL, maybe about a bucket. It can be a question, can be about any particular topic here. So that's the reason for your easy identification, I try to put them as a topic here that you see. Otherwise, these are very like keys or objects or AWS region can be specified in a single liner, right? So don't think that I'm just going on a speed phase. And the next thing is object URL. So S3, as we understand, it is a cloud object storage. It is for the internet, okay, and it can be leveraged as a service, irrespective of the other Amazon services. So every object that you store in Amazon Cloud, in Amazon S3 storage, gives you a unique URL. Okay, and using that URL, you can share that particular object with your friends, colleagues. Let's say in a bucket, you went on a tour. Okay, you went on a tour, and there are some 100 or 200 photographs. You just created a bucket and you put all 200 photographs into a bucket. Now you wanted to share one photo among 200 with one of your friend. How will you do that? It is simple. If it is a traditional storage solutions, I don't know if that works securely on internet, but S3 has to offer you a unique URL for every single object. So of 200, whatever the photograph that you wanted to share, you just can share only that photograph with the help of a unique URL that you get with your friends or colleague, whoever it is. It can be group of photographs as well. Not necessary photos all the time. It can be any object. It can be a document, it can be audio file, video file, it can be any object, and you can share that very securely. You can allow users to do only read activity, or write activity, or delete, full control. It's up to you what level of access you wanted to provision, that too on a single object of 200 or 2000 or any number of objects. Okay, so that's about your unique URL. And then you've got S3 operations. Well, the common operations that we can do is creating or deleting a bucket. Once a bucket is created, we can upload, that is, we can write an object, read an object, delete an object, meaning write a file, read a file, delete a file, and then you list the buckets or list the objects. Okay, and the same operations when you do through a REST API call, when you do through REST, which is an web protocol, I believe at least some of you know it, right? It's a protocol, web protocol. So when you have to programmatically access the internet-based applications, or when you wanted to programmatically access a service, either HTTP or HTTPS based, and then you go for REST API interface. So for all write or upload, it is a HTTP put. Remember, this is important from a certification standpoint. They will ask you, what is a REST API name for the create object? It is HTTP put. If it is a read, it is HTTP get. If it is a delete, HTTP delete. And if it is update, let's say you are updating an existing object, that's when it's called HTTP post. Okay, so for create, read, or delete, it's pretty straightforward: put, get, and delete. And for update, it is called post. Okay, so that's the maximum number of the operations that you can do. And for the regular S3 operations, these are the REST API calls. And when it comes to the durability and availability, yes, you may be doubting, okay, Venkat, I understand S3. As long as I use it for personal use, that's fine. But I wanted to use S3 for my business use, for my one of my enterprise class application, right? So what is the durability and availability of S3? Okay, so of course, S3 is designed for both high durability and high availability. Okay, so before we hit S3 durability and availability, let's understand what is durability and availability in general. Okay, so durability is how long the data is stored in the cloud in S3. Let's say today, if I upload an object and I do not want to delete it, how long Amazon can store it? Okay, so will there be any kind of outage? Will there be any kind of failure at the storage system level? And if at all there is, how Amazon will retain the data, right? So can they store an object for 100 years continuously, 200 years continuously, 1,000 years? So it is about durability, how long Amazon can store the data. Availability is about, can I access it? Can I access the data right now? Can I access the data tomorrow? Or can I access the data whenever I wanted to? It's not a question of whether the data is available or not, but it is a question of accessibility. Can I access the data whenever I wanted to? Okay. At times when, let's say you book a flight ticket and you wanted to fly, but there is a scheduled departure, but the flight is delayed. Okay. It doesn't mean the flight is not available physically, or the flight is cancelled, but there is maybe the flight is delayed. Okay. At times, because of the internet or the network outage, you may not be able to access the data. However, the data is available. Okay. So durability is about how long Amazon can store the data. Availability is about, can I access the data whenever I wanted to? Well, so when it comes to S3 durability and availability, S3 has to offer you 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. So Venkat, what does this mean? What does 11 nines means? I don't understand it. Well, for an example, if you store 10,000 objects in S3, Okay, if you store 10,000 objects in S3, there may be a loss of single object in every, I mean, once in 1 crore years of time. It is not about when you store one object in 1 crore years of time, that one object will be deleted for sure, or that one object will be missed for sure. But this is about of 10,000 objects that you store in over 1 crore years of time, that you may lose one single object. That is about 11 nines of durability. Okay, and availability is like maybe a few minutes in a month that you will not be able to access S3, but otherwise there is your data is safe. Okay, so remember, this can be your certification question, right? The durability and availability, 11 nines and 4 nines. And then data consistency. Well, Venkat, you said it is 11 nines. Okay, 11 nines of durability. How are they able to do it? Well, so far, when you have to create a EC2 instance, or when you have to create a EBS volume, you understand you understand region and availability zone. When you go to Mumbai, there are 2 availability zones. When you go to North Virginia, then you have got 6 availability zones. North California, 2 availability zones. So you have to pick the region and availability zone to create a EC2 instance and the EBS volume. But when it comes to S3, you do not have to select the availability zone, but you just have to select the region. And there is no choice for you to select the availability zone. So data is stored at a region level. First point. So meaning, when you store an object at a region level, underneath to that, the data must be getting replicated to the availability zones. That's what we have to assume. It's not written anywhere. It's just written like the data has to be replicated. That's all. But what we can assume is, as they have to offer 11 nines of durability, they must be replicating the data within availability zone. But for sure, to overcome the availability zone level failures, and to protect your data, they must be replicating the data across the availability zones. So when you write an object, and you are immediately making an attempt to read it, how about the consistency? Right? Is my data intact? Right? So the data consistency is to address about 3 different operations that we can do, or maybe 4 different operations. When you write an object, when you update an object, when you delete an object, or just do a read operation. In all 4 operations, when I try to read an object, let's say, give me let's draw a scenario here. So as we know, this is 1A availability zone. This is 1B availability zone. And maybe this is a region. Okay, maybe a Mumbai region. So we users connect to a region and you uploaded data here. So the object may be stored in 1A availability zone, and there is one more user from your organization trying to read the data, and his request might have pointed to 1B availability zone. Okay, so you actually uploaded the object here in 1A and he is trying to read the data from 1B. In that scenario, he may read the stale data, the old information, because you may say, Venkat, ideally his request must be forwarded to 1A availability zone. Why is it to 1B? Right? Well, it is the S3 internal mechanism that S3 can redirect your read or write operation to any location. Okay, your S3 data must be stored in multiple availability zones for sure. So S3 may be internally redirecting your read or write, update, delete operation to one of those locations. But while you are doing that, Yes, Srinivas.
Sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
Because for every object, we will be providing the URL for the users, right? I mean, what was stored in the S3 storage. So then, how come that will identify the different availability zone? The URL is static, right?
Yeah. So the URL is at a web layer. Let's say you are creating an object at this level. When you create an object at this level, that gives you a unique URL. There will be no change in the URL. It's intact. However, it's S3 internal mechanism that they may store it in 1A, 1B availability zone. Okay, the moment you create a bucket called X, the bucket creates in both the availability zones. Okay, you write object number 1 that gets stored here, and you are writing object number 2 that may get stored here, and S3 immediately replicates 1 over here and 2 over here. That is to make sure the content in the bucket in both the availability zone is identical. But while it is replicating object number 1 here and object number 2 to here, there may be few minutes of delay, right? It is not real time synchronization. There may be few minutes of delay. In that duration, right, there is a different user from the same organization trying to access the same bucket or the object. What happens in that scenario is what I'm trying to address here, right? Of course, what we people from an user standpoint know is an object gets me a static static URL, and that must remain static all the while. You are right, but internally, to give you 11 nines of durability, Amazon is replicating the data across the availability zones, and it is not like you have one set of data available in 1A, you always point to 1A availability zone. In case if it fails, that's when they redirect you. This is not how they operate. They redirect your read-write operations. They split your read-write operations just to ensure that you get better performance, better read and write operation performance. They will redirect your operations to both the availability zones, and they will not guarantee you to which availability zones they may redirect you. Okay. So in that scenario, what happens to your data consistency is what I'm talking here, part of the data consistency. And for sure, it will be a certification question and it will be an interview question, because this is something very important. All right. So S3 is an eventually consistent system because your data is automatically replicated across multiple servers and locations within a region. Changes in your data take some time to propagate to all the locations. Right. So he say servers and locations within a region. So I mean, this is not clear in terms of is that a server, is that an availability zone, right? What is that area that the changes need to be propagated? It's not clear, and this is not a statement that I'm making, but this is a copy paste from the Amazon's official documentation, right? Now, as a result, there are some situations.
Hey, Venkat, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Hey, I'm still stuck. So when it is replicating and user from our same session is trying to access, and if he's directed in a different zone where the data is being replicated, so replicated or let's say updated. So the user who is in different zone where the operation is being performed, will get the data, or he will be told that this is not the updated data, or how will it work? So I have object, I hope you understand, like I have object A in one region. Okay.
I got it. That's what I'm trying to address here. In this data consistency part, that's what I'm trying to address. Like what happens if a user request is redirected to a location where the data is still updating, kind of, or replicating. Okay. So as a result, there are some situations where information that you read immediately after an update or write operation may return the stale information. Okay. So let's see what are those scenarios that you may see the stale information. For example, for the put of new object. So this is pretty much clear. This is read after write consistency. Remember, firstly, S3 is a eventually consistent system. Eventually consistent system. So for all your put operations, meaning for all your new upload, for all your new upload, it is read after the write. So you can only read the object once the write is committed. There is no, there is no chance of you reading the stale information as such. No, you read it from 1A, you read it from 1B. It's still eventually consistent, meaning you can only read the data once the object is completely uploaded. That's clear. But for puts to the existing objects, or let's say the update operations, okay. So and then you may be pointed to a location where there is a stale information, or you may be pointed to a location where there is a current information, right? There is no control. Even Amazon do not have any control on to which location your request is pointed to. However, there are 100 users in your organization. If user number 1 is pointed to the stale information, well, the remaining 99 users is also pointed to the stale information for that object. Right? It is never a mix of like some of them are pointed to the old object and some of them are being pointed to the new object. Maybe a few minutes or whatever the time that it takes to replicate. Until then, if a user is pointed to the old object, remaining 99 or any number of users are pointed to the old object only. But in case if the first user pointed to the updated information, and the remaining users in the organization are pointed to the new information only. That is for your update operations. Okay. And even if it is a delete, it is the same that you have deleted an object from a location called 1A availability zone. In case your request is pointed to that availability zone, it simply says the object no longer exists. But if your read is pointed to a different availability zone where there is still object, the changes need to be propagated. You may read the data for a while, and then immediately the object will be deleted, and you will see object no longer exists. But in case again the same, if there are a few hundreds of users, first request is pointed to a location where there is still data available, and the subsequent request is also pointed to the same until the data becomes unavailable. But it never happens like a few user requests are pointed to a location where there is no data, and few user requests are pointed to a location where there is a data. Okay, so for all new uploads, it is read after write, meaning you can only read the data after the write operation. But for all update or delete operations, it's the eventual consistency, meaning your request is pointed to a location, all of your requests, not the mix. It is never like never a mix of inconsistency. Okay, some are redirected to 1A availability, some are redirected to 1B. It never happens. Hope this is clear.
I have a question, Venkat.
Yes.
So the objects are like files. So let's say I have like 100 files in one bucket or 100 objects in one bucket, and they are in different regions or availability zones. And in my organization, there are so many users who are making changes in different. So you're saying changes in different, they are directed to different zones, first of all, and then they are making changes in different objects, right? Which is possible.
Right.
So in different environments and all that stuff.
Right.
So you're saying so like in databases, we have like something called commit. Once it is commit only, then the rest of the users, except the one which can read it, right?
Right.
Till then, they will get the old data.
Right.
So here you're saying they will not see stale data at all. Like, so the data won't be provided to them, or so if I run a query and somebody has changed something in my region that has not been updated, I won't get result, or I will get old results, or
No, I mean, so for the new upload,
Uh-huh.
okay, you are uploading a new image or a document. So when somebody else try to read that, they will not get any data until that upload is complete. This is for any new uploads. Until the upload completes, upload completely done, users will not be able to read it.
So this is basically they don't have data in their region. They don't have object. I'm sorry. So that is upload, right? They don't have the object at all.
At all. That is for new. But for update, you already have an object and you're trying to update it, right? You're updating it. Or you have an object and you're kind of deleting it, right? In these two scenarios, it is eventual consistency, meaning let's say it's 1A availability zone. Like you said, you have 10 to 100 different objects. It's 1B. If I delete one object here in 1A,
delete is clear. I'm sorry. I mean, I just don't want to waste time. So delete is clear. Till I have it in 1B, I'll be able to access once it is deleted from 1B. But if I update something in 1A, I mean, not me, somebody else updates something in 1A,
right?
And that object was already here in 1B, but the change has not been propagated. So I run a query which sends me to 1B. What will be the result? The old one, the new one, or just have to wait till it gets updated? That's. I was just trying to understand the data consistency.
That's what the update. Let's say you are uploading a file called, you are updating a file called X here in 1A. So the same file X is available here. So when a user hit your S3 storage, it's up to S3 to which availability zone that it forwards the request to. In case, let's say, this request is forwarded to 1A where the update is currently happening. So this certainly returns, if the update is not complete, it is in progress, it certainly returns the old data.
Right.
Okay. It points to here, it also certainly returns the old data. But let's say the update is complete, let 10 or 10 a.m. the update is complete. By 10:05, it get updates here. Within that 5 minutes of time, it is a question that users will be, what data the users will be receiving. Is that the new data?
From 1B. From 1B, right?
No, that's where I'm telling. No, it's again up to S3. When a user hit S3, it's up to S3 to which AZ that they redirect the request to. Right? They will not check the object version. Okay, this is a new object, so I have to forward it. They'll just randomly forward the user request. But again, for the same X, if they forward a request, there are 100 users, like you said, and if a request come to old data, the remaining 99 requests would come to the same old data. There will never be a mix of inconsistency that few user requests are forwarded to the new object and few are forwarded to the old object. That doesn't happen.
So this is like controlled at the request level. I mean, so these 100 users who are requesting, if they're requesting different data, they should be sent to different regions. But you're saying they will all be sent to, for this request, they all be sent to.
It's not different data. It is the same file. Okay. All 100 users are accessing the same file. Okay. When they all are accessing the same file and there is a 5 minutes delay between the sync, let's say. There is an old file, there is a new file in two different locations. It is a question, out of 100 users, will all 100 be redirected to the new file or to the old file? Or some part of that 100 users will be forwarded to the new file, or how is that? Right? So to address that question, your update or your delete, for all your update and delete, if the first request forwarded to the old data, the remaining user request has to follow this to the same location. If the first request go to the new address location, I mean the new file location, The remaining user requests will go to the new location. But it never happens. Like some of them go to old file, some of them go to new file. That's what I wanted to convey.
Okay, I understand that. And I'm seriously, I'm this last thing. So once I get data, I'm not sure. So like
Right.
somebody asked me something, I got the data. I don't know if it was already changed. And after 5 minutes, if I go back and check it, it will be different.
Right. You never know.
Because I don't know, I'm getting the old or new. Okay.
Right.
I mean, that's
how it is. I mean, in fact, they might have disable read operations to or read or write operations to one location, and they can only allow read and write to only one location. But to give us the better performance, they wanted to allow users read write from multiple locations. And while they are ensuring that users do the read and write operations at multiple locations, so they opt to the eventual consistency just to make sure the data integrity and the consistency is delivered. It is just like the NoSQL databases. When you go for horizontal scaling, it's how the NoSQL databases have the internal mechanism of the replication between the nodes just to maintain the same data is maintained in multiple locations.
right, but we don't use like multiple locations. We just use one. I mean, if I send a query, and if I get a result, I won't go back to make sure whether it has changed or not. I mean, I'm not questioning. I'm just trying to understand. I mean, to get through the.
But
problem.
In NoSQL, it is designed such a way you have multiple nodes, isn't it? Multiple nodes.
Right.
The node is nothing but an individual database. That's not the case in your relational database. So it is how the database is designed and it is internal operations. The same way, don't compare database with the storage offering. Try to compare object level storage with the different storage offerings. Okay, so that's when you understand Amazon is putting all their efforts in order to make sure they give you better performance and the data consistency or data integrity. So in that process, you really do not have to go back and check if you received the old data or not, because maybe understand the use cases in what all scenario that you may have to dump the data into the storage. You are trying to understand it from an application standpoint and the database standpoint. How do I get to know that this is my recent or latest transaction on the database? Right? But if it is a storage, you would find a different use case than a database. In that scenario, you do not have to really cross-check that you really receive the latest data or not. You will get eventually, maybe in few minutes, the subsequent reads will get you the latest data. However, that should not be a worry.
Okay.
Because the use cases are different for database and the storage.
Sure. Thanks.
Yeah. So then the static website hosting. So as we understand that every single object in S3 storage gives you a unique URL, then Amazon says, okay, the bucket that you have, you can convert a bucket into a static website as well. So you build a website, it can be a HTML application or it can be a PHP. You just build an application, a static web page, and you upload all your content into S3 bucket, and then you convert that into a static web host, right? That's possible. It cannot be a dynamic website, but yes, you can host your static website. You do not have to engage a server and all that infrastructure just to make a bucket as, just to make a static website ready. You do not have to have a server or a hosting space from GoDaddy or anywhere. You just can engage a bucket, as a static website. We will see that practically how it helps us. But yes, and as you see that a bucket gives you a long URL. It cannot be a friendly name. Well, there is a service from Amazon called Route 53, using which you can create an alias record, so that if you already have a domain name registered, well, the bucket name can be with bucket name you can create an alias record, and you can use your own domain name so that users can access the domain name instead of the long bucket name that you would normally get. Okay, and then the access control. There are two different access control mechanism available for your data that is in S3. Okay, because S3 is such a powerful tool, such a powerful storage solution that it gives you very plain, a flat access control mechanism that you say, hey, you read all objects in S3, you write, or you get full access control, right? It is read, write, or full access using the coarse-grained access control. That's very basic access control. And there is something called fine-grained access control that is kind of very granular. You can allow a particular user from a particular IP address for a particular period of time, right? So, and you can enforce a few more filterings, like you can only allow SSL certificate based authentication. So it can be as granular as to a particular IP address between a time window and only SSL certificate based, only HTTPS communication. So it can be that granular. Okay, if I can restrict a user only for 1 hour, that to a read operation on a particular bucket, if I have such kind of use cases, well, you can put all that together into an fine-grained access control policies. That's called the bucket policies. You put that conditional statement into a bucket policy, you just save it, and that helps you control your access, control over S3 bucket, right? So there are two types of access controls. The coarse-grained, with which you just can allow a user to read, write, or full control. That's all. There is no granularity. But with fine-grained access control, you can allow everybody on the internet to get read access, or to get write access, to get full access, or you can close the gates. Like you can secure your S3 bucket to access, to restrict a particular user from a particular IP based on the protocol that they use and so on. Right? We will practically see like how can we implement that IAM security policy or S3 bucket policies. And like I said, there are 4 different tiers of storage available. That's S3 standard is the default one, and it offers you the high durability and availability. The 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability that we talk about is actually part of S3 standard. And it is low latency, high performance. So S3 is the best performing, and of course the best performing and high durable storage offering in the S3 category. And by default, when you store an object, that by default goes to S3 standard. And later you can actually choose to move it to the other tiers that we're going to discuss. And then S3 infrequently accessed. Well, as the name says, infrequently accessed. So any object or any data that you have, and you will not access it on a daily basis, and then you better move the data to infrequently accessed, because if you see per GB price for S3 standard and infrequently accessed, there is a difference. S3 infrequently accessed, or IA, is available at a lesser price than the standard. But here there are some conditions, like you just cannot use S3 infrequently accessed, but to get the advantage of the features of S3, that is both features and the price offerings, you can only store the data that is stored at least for 30 days. Okay, and the file size is at least 128 KB. So in general, an object can be 0 to 5 terabyte. But to store an object into infrequently accessed, the minimum file size is 128 KB. It doesn't mean you cannot store file of 10 KB. You can, but they will charge you for 128 KB. No matter you use 10 KB or 20 KB, they still charge you for 128 KB. And you have to store a file for 30 days. That doesn't mean you store a file and you delete it within 10 days, but they still charge you for 30 days. And once you store some data and you wanted to read the data, they will charge you for the retrieval as well. Meaning, let's say you stored some 100 GB and you wanted to read some 1 GB of data of it. So when you wanted to read the data, it is infrequently accessed, meaning they may be storing the data into the lower tier, lowest performing hard disks, and then they have to retrieve it to the upstreams. They have to retrieve it to the user interaction levels. So when you read 1 GB of data, apart from the storage price, they also charge you for the retrieval storage. And that's per GB. The minimum is GB. If you read if you read 100 MB also, they will charge you for 1 GB. Right? So you are storing 100 GB of data. So for the entire month, you anyways have to pay for the 100 GB, and you are retrieving, let's say, 2 GB of data. So you have to pay for the 2 GB of retrieval cost, whatever it is. Right? So as they are charging you for the retrieval, it is only suits you when you have data that is not frequently accessed. But when you have data that is frequently accessed, better go for standard. Of course, infrequently accessed also gives you 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. And then S3 reduced redundancy. As the name says, reduced redundancy. Well, it's not 11 nines, but it is 4 nines of durability. So there is a possibility of data loss. So, well, when you have any data that's not so critical or data can be reproduced, in that scenario, you better go for reduced redundancy so that you can save on some money, because it's not the same per GB cost in standard and in reduced redundancy. So when you have a frequently accessed data that is not so critical, that is not business critical, you better go for reduced redundancy. And then finally, the Glacier. So it is mainly the purpose of Glacier is archival storage. It offers you the extreme low cost per GB. Okay, so you can opt Glacier to archive cloud data or to archive on-premises data, and it has to offer you extreme low cost per GB. And remember, this is not again, this is similar to infrequently accessed. You cannot retrieve the data immediately. To retrieve an Amazon Glacier object, you issue a restore command. It takes minimum of 3 to 5 hours, okay, to retrieve or to restore that data. So that object is copied from Glacier to reduced redundancy storage. At that point of time, the object stays in 2 different locations. One is Glacier, the other is reduced redundancy. So remember, you will be charged for these 2 storage locations. So for example, there is a 100 GB of data that you've archived. From that, you wanted to retrieve a file that is 10 GB. So the moment you execute retrieve or restore, after 5 hours, the data is available in reduced redundancy. So that 10 GB of file is there in reduced redundancy, and it is there in the Glacier as well. So as soon as you are done with reading the data from RR, reduced redundancy storage, you better delete it immediately, or else you will end up paying for the same data 2 times, right? So, and remember, yeah, Rupesh.
Okay, so on this point of the Glacier side, the retrieval the data for the 3 to 5 hours. If I want to browse the data also, it may take the same time?
Same.
Oh, okay.
You just cannot browse real time. You still have to execute the restore.
Oh, so we have to be
Okay.
I mean, yeah.
You can see the inventory. I mean, you can see what files are there. You can, but you cannot see the content of the file.
Yeah, but
you can see the hierarchy.
Yeah, okay.
You can see the hierarchy, the file system, the files, different objects that you have.
Yeah, for that
but you cannot read them.
Yeah, for that I don't need to wait for 3 to 5 hours, right?
No, you don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and again, it is similar to infrequently accessed, that apart from the storage capacity, the 100 GB data that you have stored, you are anyways paying for that 100 GB. But apart from that, if you retrieve maybe some 10 GB, you have to pay for the 10 GB of retrieval price again. So storage capacity plus retrieval capacity. Sorry, storage price plus retrieval price. So these are the 4 tiers that are available. You need to understand your application needs and find the right storage offering that is from S3 and engage it. But remember, infrequently accessed gives you 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. Of course, Glacier also gives you 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. But the question is the retrieval time. Infrequently accessed will not take certainly 3 to 5 hours of time, but it definitely takes some time. But with respect to the Glacier, it for sure takes 3 to 5 hours of time to retrieve a single file. It can be in few KBs also. It takes 5 hours of time. Okay. So if you really wanted to archive the data, you go for Glacier. But let's say maybe the frequency of you reading the data is on a monthly basis, then you better go for infrequently accessed. Or the data is not critical and you're okay, but you will be accessing it very frequently. You better go for reduced redundancy. Or your data is critical and you will be accessing it very frequently, and standard is a choice for you, S3 standard. And then to talk about the advanced features, the life cycle management. Well, of course, Venkat, I understand. Okay, now, as we understand, the nature of data is like initially it is hot data. The day the data is created, it is hot. I'll be accessing it frequently. Maybe after 30 days of time, it becomes warm. I'll be accessing it less frequently. Maybe after a few months, it becomes cold. I'll not be accessing it. But as per my company policy, we need to retain it for a few years, right? In that scenario, I really find it very difficult to move the objects from S3 standard to infrequently accessed, from there to the Glacier on a timely basis. For example, if there is an object today in my bucket, and as soon as the object turns 30 days old, I wanted to move that from standard to infrequently accessed. Maybe the same object, as soon as it turns 3 months old, I wanted to move that to Glacier. Okay, so I do not want to do it manually. Is there an automated way? Well, there is something called life cycle management. So you can write policies and you attach a policy to the entire bucket or to the folder or to an object as well. So the lifecycle management policies are to monitor the objects, and policy can be, as you see, initially the objects are in S3 standard. Okay, you can write a policy document that says, hey, as soon as an object becomes 30 days old, you please move that to infrequently accessed. So out of 100 objects that you have in a bucket, if there are 10 objects that are 30 days old, the policy only moves those 10 objects to infrequently accessed. And maybe the next statement in the policy document says, as soon as an object turns 90 days old, you please move the object from infrequently accessed to Glacier, right? Because I'm archiving it. I'll not be accessing it as per my business policy or the application behavior. I'll not be accessing it. Maybe after 3 years, I wanted to delete it from Glacier so that I do not have to pay for it anymore. So as soon as an object turns 3 years old, please delete it. There can be hundreds of objects in Glacier storage, but it only deletes an object when it turns 3 years old. Clear? So the lifecycle management is to programmatically control the life cycle of an object and to move the storage, to move the object between the storage tiers automatically to save on the price.
So this one will customize, right?
Yeah, it can be customized.
Okay.
And then encryption. Well, as you understand yesterday, there is a key management service from Amazon. So when you have to move the objects between the regions, and then you better encrypt it. There is something called cross-region replication in Amazon S3. So that is to make sure that you replicate the data of S3 from one region to the other region. That's not enabled by default. You have to select it. When you enable the replication, well, the data is being replicated from Mumbai to Singapore, let's say. So if it is 100 GB of data, you have to pay for 100 GB in Mumbai, and you also have to pay for 100 GB in Singapore as well. Right? You are paying 2 times. That is just to get more durability. That's all. And you've got versioning. Well, it helps you protect your data against accidental deletions or miscellaneous updates. In that scenario, Amazon S3 automatically maintains the backup copy of the file. And in case if you wanted to restore the file, you just can restore it, the old version. Okay, the versioning is automatic. Cross-region replication. Well, that's what I was telling you. You have a bucket or you have object, right? So cross-region replication can be enabled on the entire bucket or on a particular folder that you have inside a bucket. And you can choose the destination, right? So you can choose out of 16, any single region can be source and any other region can be destination, right? From North California to Mumbai, Singapore to Australia, that is Sydney, it can be anywhere. You can enable that cross-region replication. And then logging. So logging is when you log into S3 and you do any operation, it can be create an object, create a bucket, delete, any activity that you do, it triggers a log, it triggers an event, right? So you can ask S3 to store those logs, and the logs can also be stored in one of the S3 bucket. For a bucket name called X, whatever you do on X bucket, the logs can be stored in the same bucket, or you can store the logs in a different bucket called Y. Okay, so at times, let's say somebody have deleted bucket called Y. So along with the data, if you store the logs in the same bucket, the logs are also deleted. So it makes sense that you store the logs of bucket Y into a bucket X. That way, when a bucket is deleted, you have the logs. At least you can see who have done what. And then you've got event notification. So whenever there is an event, right? Maybe the put, post, delete, update. Right? Whenever there is an event and you wanted to notify yourself or notify a team, you can configure the email notifications. And then that triggers a notification so that, hey, so-and-so user have put an object into a bucket, you will be notified. And S3 transfer acceleration is what I was talking about to address the large data migrations or large data uploads. So we will see that. I mean, when you try to upload an object into S3, it is over the internet. But when you engage S3 transfer acceleration, that happens through the edge locations that we have. So you will see a better upload speed than the standard upload. But there is an additional price when you engage transfer acceleration, as you're getting the additional speed. But we will see, kind of what percentage of the performance improvement you see when you go for accelerated upload than the traditional upload. And if you wanted to go in detail in S3 pricing or more details, the technical details about S3, you have the developer guide available at the given URLs. You can look at it. And S3 is not just priced based on the amount of storage that you are using, but they also charge you based on the number of read and write operations you are doing. Okay, so let me quickly take you there.
Venkat, this is Suresh.
Yes, Suresh.
Yeah, it's regarding cross-region replication. So, for example, if I have some 1,000 objects in my bucket, so if I want to replicate another region, so will that be possible?
Yes, it is.
And what would be the charges? Like they'll be charging for both regions, or for only one region they will charge?
They'll be charging you for both regions.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. So you can see for the first 50 terabytes, of course, we are in Ohio, maybe there will be a slight price difference for S3 between different regions that we engage. So if it is in Mumbai, for the first 50 terabytes, if it is a standard, then it is 0.025 per GB. Okay, maybe let's say standard and frequently accessed, and is 0.019. So just to discuss about a simple scenario and to understand the price difference. Okay, so for first 1 GB, this is the price, and when I go for 10 GB of data, so end of the month I'll be paying 0.25 USD for 10 GB. All right, it's not expensive. That too for 11 nines of durability. Okay, so when I go for infrequently accessed, it is 0.19, and Glacier is 0. Yeah, it is 0.05 USD. It's not even 5 cents. All right. So if I see for 50 GB, let me see, it's 1.25 USD, $1.25 for 50 GB for 1 month. That is of 11 nines of durability and 4 nines of availability. Right. So that's the price benefit you see when you engage S3 storage. And infrequently accessed is close to 1 USD, and Glacier, you see there is close to what between standard and Glacier, it's 4 times of the price difference. And to take this price difference benefit to your company, you need to architect your application such a way that you move the data from standard to infrequently accessed and infrequently accessed to Glacier, and you delete it permanently with the help of lifecycle management policies. So this is just to give you an idea of the price difference between standard, infrequently, Glacier, and there is also the price available for reduced redundancy. But try to understand the price differences. And after 50 GB, if you cross 50 GB, sorry, 50 TB, it is, I'm sorry, maybe you can go for 100, 205, 1 TB also. You can see how much it may cost you. But once you cross that 50 TB, for next 450, it is further reduced. It is not 25, but it is 24. And once you cross 500 terabytes, it's further reduced to 0.23. Right? However, the infrequently accessed and Glacier stands same, but the standard tier, there is a price reduction. That said, let's quickly get into the lab of S3. Well, you just have to go to storage over here. Yep.
Just quickly. So that was 50 terabyte. The rate was 50 terabyte. And if we just do the maths, it will be, I'm just confirming. I mean, that'll be, that's per GB, right? So it'll be whatever, 50 cross 1024. I mean, that sounds very
50 terabyte it was, yes. Maybe let's say 50 into 1024 is what? This into this. It's 1280. 1280 USD per month.
If we go up to 50 terabyte.
50, right.
Yeah. Okay.
You can find it in storage category S3, or you directly create a quick access link here. All right. So these are all the buckets that I've created earlier for my different other labs. So when I go to S3, you see this is global. I cannot redirect you to a region and I operate. It's the global console that you get for S3. However, if you see the buckets, this bucket is created in Singapore, while the others are in Mumbai, North California, North Virginia regions. Right? So without creating a bucket, if I try to do anything, well, delete a bucket, empty. If I select a bucket, it'll ask me to delete or empty, but nothing is presented. If I am trying to upload an object, I cannot do it because either I have to get into the existing buckets. Maybe let's say I've selected a bucket. Now I can see upload, create a folder, rename the existing, copy, paste, etc. But if I go back to S3 storage root level, then I must have to create a bucket, or I have to get into an existing bucket. Without creating a bucket, I cannot, I cannot upload any object. First thing. Second thing, this is the latest user interface console that you see, and there is an old interface available. If you click over, switch to the old console, you will get to see. This is the old console. Even here, when I right click, you can see the create a bucket, or when I go to actions, only thing I can see active is create a bucket. But when I get into a bucket name, right, I have two objects in here, and I can actually upload, create a folder, I can create the hierarchy. Right? So you can work out of both the switch to the new console or the old console, it's more or less the same. But the same features that we have discussed, how are they arranged here is a bit different. For example, if I select a bucket, maybe let's do the first things first. Maybe make an attempt to create a bucket and see. I say create a bucket. So here, create a bucket. Actually, it is a wizard, and it takes you through the entire list of features that we've discussed so far. That is to set the properties, the permissions, and the lifecycle policies, etc. Everything, or you just can create a bucket here. But when you look at the old console, you have to create a bucket first, then deal with the remaining stuff. I mean, not to confuse you, but I would advise you to do a lot of practicals around S3. So I'm making an attempt to create a bucket. I say Venkat. So it says V is capital, so you cannot have the uppercase letters, and bucket name must start with lowercase. Maybe let's say I go keep small v. Okay, and I wanted to create it in one of the region out of 16. It's a Mumbai.
Venkat, this is sorry to interrupt.
Yes, sorry.
It's your screen. It's going off on that Excel sheet. I don't know why. I'm seeing that.
Yeah,
are you showing that?
Yeah, you can probably close the spreadsheet.
Okay, it's coming and going. It's on and off. I don't know why.
So do you see now properly? Is this clear now?
Yeah, it's okay now.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, it's clear.
Thank you. So I was saying the Venkat, which has a capital letter in there. So I just removed the capital letter and I keep the small v and I try to create a bucket. So the requested bucket name is not available, right? So I hope you remember that we have discussed a bucket name must be unique, right? So it is advised that you follow the naming convention like the date, the month, your company name or your application name, the project name, etc. So I say 17th August S3 demo. And to which region you wanted to create a bucket, this is how you have to select. It's a bit different from the other AWS services. If it is S3, sorry, if it is EC2, we will be navigating to a region first, right? And then we create workloads. But here it's the global console. While you create a bucket, you have to choose which region you wanted to create a bucket. I'm okay with Mumbai, and I just create now. I wanted to keep things very simple. We talk about the remaining features later, but I say this is what I've created a bucket now, right? So this is the information about bucket. You have got logging disabled, static website disabled, requested pay disabled, cross region disabled, transfer acceleration disabled. The permissions, the owner is the help me, who is actually the root user. And then bucket policies, there are no policies. There is only one grantee, that is the root user. And management, lifecycle policies, analytics, inventory, none of them are enabled. This is very basic bucket that we have created. When I get into the bucket, I have to click on the bucket. Now we are inside the bucket. You can create a folder just to kind of form your hierarchy. Maybe I say to group your objects. Okay, maybe you have JPEG extension files, put all of them into a folder. MPEG extension, put all of them into a folder. EXE extension, MSI extension, put them into a folder. So just to group the objects, you create a folder, or you can directly upload an object. Let's say add a file, and then AWS. Let's say I'm uploading a baby photographs here, and I say upload. So you can see the status over here, that is 1 successful. If you find any errors, you will see the number of errors are in progress. Now, when I select this object, you see there is a URL available. When I click on this URL, well, 1 second. So you guys can see what is, I ping you the URL in the chat window. You can try access the same object. It says access denied. Okay. So currently there is only one user who have got access on this bucket. Right? Nobody else have got. Maybe let me try to upload one more object here, and I'll demonstrate you. You can also do a drag and drop. That also works. Right. So now you see that access denied message. To keep the very simple permissions, what I can do is I right click on a file and I say make it public. When I say make it public, anybody on the internet can read the file. Okay. So when I go over here and you see, I'm refreshing the same console and I can see the image. I believe you guys can also see the image. Okay, the first file. Maybe there are smart people on the earth. They say, okay, if this is the URL, and if you observe this URL, until here it is S3, the region, and Amazon service, and you've got your bucket name in there, and the file name. So people may think, okay, if there is one.jpg, there will be two.jpg as well. Let's try to access it. You see, the two dot, you are getting access denied message. Okay. So the permissions that I give, it's only for a particular file, not to the entire list of files in that bucket. However, I can also write policies at an entire bucket level. For example, I go to permissions over here. So the public access is not granted to the entire bucket. And I go to the bucket policy over here. You can compose a policy if you are familiar with JSON syntax generation, or if you wanted to refer to the documentation, you just go to the documentation over here and see the reference policies. So I go for bucket policy examples. So grant permissions to multiple accounts with added conditions, or grant read-only permission to anonymous user. Well, this is a policy that I want. I wanted to grant read-only permission to anybody on the internet, on the entire list of objects in the bucket. Okay. Or else if you wanted to restrict access to a specific IP address, you can just copy this policy, or restrict access to a specific HTTP referrer, or it's like grant access to Amazon CloudFront origin identity. So different. You can also inject multi-factor authentication, right? So there are different policies available as an example, and you can also make one that is very complex. So I copied the policy, I paste here. And now, if you see the bucket name, you have to change. Keep our bucket name, that is 17th August S3 demo, right? And remember, I am saying this bucket /star, meaning everything inside that bucket. If you wanted to give maybe one.jpg or something of that one file name or the entire folder name, you can do that. But I'm applying this policy to the entire bucket. I save it. Okay, the policy document is saved. I go back to the same 2.jpg, try to reload it. You see, an anonymous user can read the file. You can also try accessing the same now. It should work for you. Earlier it wasn't, because the policy is applied to the entire bucket. So every single object in the bucket can be read, right? It is read-only permission. Well, the other thing you see, the storage class is standard if you see here. Okay. And if you wanted to move that to a different tier, to a different storage tier, well, you can actually say change storage class. From standard, you can go to infrequently accessed. You can move it to reduced redundancy, and you cannot directly move that to Glacier, but you have to programmatically control that. You can archive that to the Glacier. Okay. If I have to move it to, let's say, reduced redundancy, save it, change. Now you see, the file 2 is actually in standard and file 1 is in reduced redundancy. That's how you move files between a reduced redundancy or any other tier. If you wanted to bring it back, it is just change storage tier and say standard. That's how you do it. And then versioning, right? Currently it is disabled. You just can say enable, and then once you enable the versioning, the files that you store, for example, maybe let me create a text file. I'm saving this file. Okay, so S3 version, it is a text file. I save it. Right, I come upload the file. This is the file. Upload. You see, it's the success. Now I go to properties and I say enable versioning, enable it, save. Okay, the versioning is enabled now. If I go back to the bucket and maybe I kind of I happen to delete this file. I happen to delete that file. And later, if you wanted to restore that file, okay, so you just can, just a minute. I'm just checking, there must be. Because I was working out of the old console and I'm just exploring this new console. Properties. Let me go back, come back here. Well, if I just go to the old console, okay, and this is 17th August is the bucket, and you see the versions, it's hide, and I say show, I can see the versions available. Okay, I'm sorry. It seems, I don't know what has happened. Let me try that one more time. Now we have the file. Show. Okay, and I am just deleting this file. File got deleted. So now there are only two. In old console, the versioning is actually available this way. You can see the versions. If the versions are hidden, only the actual files are available here. If I say show the hidden files, I mean the versioning enabled, you have a version file available, and this is the date and time the file is available. If I say open, I can see this is the initial file state, i.e. the version 1. You can kind of overwrite this file with a different text, or you can delete a file. In our scenario that we have deleted this file, right? So how you restore is like, for example, you have to download this file and re-upload. But in the new management console, I heard that they have improved this feature that you can directly restore from the deleted to the latest. But I'm sorry, I don't find a feature that talks about. Well, no problem. I'll check on this. Okay, I'll check on this. I'll let you know in the new management console where to find the versioning information, right? And then the logging. So logging is just, you say enable. When you enable, you have to choose which bucket you wanted to store the log files are in. So this is our current working bucket, and so it is better that you select a different bucket name. And then if you wanted to give a prefix, like let's say in this bucket, you create a directory and you say maybe 17th August demo, right? That way we can understand, okay, this folder is actually, or I say the logs. Okay, so this folder is actually for the logs of this bucket. It's easy for us to understand. So logs of 17th August S3 demo are getting stored into CloudTrail API call August 17th, and in that bucket, this is a prefix that you're giving so that it is easy for you to understand. So I'm not enabling it now because it is just simple that you enable and all your logs are captured in static website hosting. Well, the static website hosting is it is yet to, it is disabled state. The moment you say enable, you have to give the home page here. It's index.html or whatever it is. For example, you create a sample HTML file. Let me go here. Maybe you see, this is a sample HTML file that is running out of my E drive. Okay, welcome to S3 static web page. So let me upload this file into S3 and see how we can actually convert this bucket into a website. Upload, add files. This is a file. Say upload. And as I go to properties and as I go to static website hosting, if I take this URL now, this is the endpoint, you see. If I take the URL, it is expected because we are yet to convert this as a web page. I say use this and it is HTML. Similarly, if I have error document, I can give and I'm saving it. Okay, now I can reload the same. It is working out of internet now. I give you the URL in the chat window. You can try accessing it. It is working out of internet. It is the 17th August S3 demo.s3 website .ap south1 Amazon AWS.com. And to this long name, you can create a user-friendly domain name in S3. Right? That we will talk later point of time. But this is how you do it. And then tags, it is just the key pair that you create. Cross-region replication, it's disabled at this point of time. When you say enable, currently this is the location and where do you want the destination? From Asia Pacific Mumbai to which location you wanted to replicate to. And then this is what I'm talking about, transfer acceleration. If you wanted to compare your data speed, well, you go to the speed comparison here, and it will try to upload a sample file using S3 direct upload and S3 accelerated. We will come back here in a few minutes. You'll see it will try to compare a sample upload to this bucket from all other regions, and it will tell you the difference between the direct upload and the difference between accelerated upload. Right? And then events. Like I said, you can actually create a notification, like whenever you put an object, post, copy. So any event that you do on S3, you wanted to create a notification. Well, for which you have to create an SNS notification. SNS notification. Then choose which topic do you wanted to use to send the notification. Well, these are similar to distribution list you have in your organization. For example, CPU alerts is a SNS topic, a simple notification service topic that I've created. Maybe a few classes later, we will go to the SNS part of the CloudWatch discussion. There I will show you how to create an SNS topic and how to subscribe yourself to that topic so that you will receive notifications about that particular topic. So for S3 bucket, not all of you wanted to receive the notifications. Maybe the few members in your team or few members in your organization wanted to receive notifications, event notifications of this bucket, right? So you choose the respective topic and save it, right? So that way, if you wanted to just notify for put operations or notify for copy operations or whatever it is, you create a notification. And then finally, the requester page is like, let's say I'm recording all these sessions, okay, and I'm uploading them to S3 storage. And I can allow you to read the video files, to access the video files. So if there are some 50 participants in a class and each participant is watching some 10 times a day, it is 15 to 10, 500 times a day. And end of the month, if you see 500 into 30, 1500 or something, sorry, 15,000 or something. Now the question is, if along with the storage capacity, I only have to pay for the number of read and write operations, remember that. Okay, S3 is not just for the storage capacity. The pricing is not just based on the pricing, but it is also based on the number of read and write requests. So if it is 15,000 requests every month and I have to pay, why should I pay while you watch the videos? Right? There can be different business use cases, but it is just make sure instead of I pay the bill for the number of read operations you do, I can ask you to pay it. Right? If a student watches it 10 times, maybe the student will pay for the number of read operations. I can do that. But the limitation over here is to enable requester pays, the requester must have an AWS account. Right? You being a student must have an AWS account and you must be coming through your AWS account. Otherwise, anonymous access is disabled. Okay. Because they cannot enforce the pricing on you when you do not have an AWS account. Right? So we have seen the permissions when it comes to the management. Let's talk about the lifecycle management. I wanted to create a rule called maybe STD, standard, infrequently accessed, and Glacier. Okay. So maybe 30 standard, 90 infrequently accessed, and 365 Glacier. Meaning 30 days you will keep it in standard, then you move it to infrequently accessed. 90 days you'll keep it in infrequently accessed, you move it to Glacier, and 365 days you keep it in Glacier and you delete it. Okay. And if you wanted to keep any prefix, you can do that, or else you just move on to what files you wanted to add this policy, to the current version or to the previous versions. As you understand, every time once you enable the versioning, right, there can be n number of versions maintained. Every time you make a change to a file, a version is maintained. So how many versions should I maintain actually? The more versions, it is more storage capacity. The more capacity, I have to pay more money. So to keep the billing in control, maybe I am interested to maintain a policy document, sorry, the version copy 30 days. After that, I wanted to delete it, right? Only the previous versions. So I can apply this policy to the previous versions, or I can apply this policy to the current version, or to both, right? So to keep it straightforward, to avoid confusions, let's apply this to the current version, to the current files. So I say the first transition is transition to the infrequently used after 30 days. And I'll add one more, transition to Amazon Glacier after 60 days. It's up to us how I wanted to. Let's say I wanted to move it to after 90 days, and this is after maybe 120 days. All right, and move next. Expiration. So after 485 days from Glacier, I wanted to delete it, or maybe after 600 days, I wanted to delete it. Okay, so that's possible. And clean up incomplete multiple uploads. Well, when you try to upload large sets of data to the cloud, it happens that some of the files partially get uploaded and their upload will never get complete. Right? So such objects will not shown in the inventory in the management console. However, they occupy the space. So you can choose this option, say clean up the incomplete uploads after 7 days, because when you are uploading data in terabytes, it definitely takes few days or few weeks at times. So based on your situation, you give the dates and proceed further. This is a summary that current version, you're applying this policy to the current version. After 90 days, it will be moved on to infrequently accessed. After 120 days, it will be moved on to the Glacier. And after 600 days, it will be deleted. And for incomplete uploads, after 7 days, they will be get deleted. Save. Okay. So we have applied this policy to this bucket, and whenever an object get uploads to all the objects in that bucket, the life cycle policy will get applied. And every time an object turns 60 days old or 90 days old, 120 days old, 600 days old, the appropriate action will be triggered. Analytics matrices and inventory are the recent, the latest features that got added recently. Even I am not aware of them, but I guess they are about like analytics, like how many requests every day happen to a particular object to the entire bucket kind of thing. So to analyze, help you analyze matrices. To be honest, I'm not sure of these three. These three got added recently. I'll have a check on them and I'll get back to you. So the same can be found when you go to the old console. Just a quick run through on the same features and how you find them in the old console. So when you select a bucket, towards the right hand side, you have the properties. So the permissions can be found here. The bucket policies here, right? Static website. This is where you have enabled the static website. And remember, this HTML index.html, the file that you gave must exist here. It must be the same name. You cannot have a different file name here and you cannot give a different name here. It must be the same. And logging, this is where you enable the logging. It's not enabled. Event notification, right? And your versioning, lifecycle management policies. So it says to view, modify rules. Of course, recently they've made it read-only. Earlier, even for the last batch that I've delivered, it was enabled. And the cross-region replication, well, yeah, this is where it is. So it is 20% slower. Even, the S3 accelerated transfer is 20% slower than the direct upload. Okay. So in this situation, they will not charge you any extra money when you go for transfer, accelerated transfer. But you see, from San Francisco to this bucket, it is 10% faster. From this location, it is 30% faster from Dublin. And from Singapore to the bucket, given bucket, it is 9% slower. So they will only charge you extra money when there is the acceleration in the upload. From Ohio, it is 60% faster. For Canada, it is 39, right? So it depends. It depends. But from Mumbai, the direct upload is better than the accelerated upload. So when you go for accelerated upload, normally they will charge you extra money because they are offering you the additional acceleration. But when the real upload is, when it is slower than the actual direct upload, then they will not charge you additional money. So the cross-region replication. Then tags, this is where you give the key pairs or the tags just to differentiate your workloads. And then requester pays, this is where you enable. Storage management is where we've discussed about the analytics and all those recently got added, right? So this is how you find the old console and the new console. When you select a particular object, then you can go to the object level properties. When you go to details, it is just selected the appropriate tier just to save. Just to move the object into the respective tiers of the storage. And permissions about a single object can be found here. So add permission, you can make it to everyone, anonymous access, or you just directly right-click over the object and you say make it to public or download it, whatever it is. And the versioning, like I said, you can find that here, and it is straightforward. All right. So I know it is a very lengthy class, more than 2 hours, as it was an interactive session during the theoretical discussion. It stretched to this extent. That's fine. I'm okay with that. Any questions, guys?
Yeah, Venkat, this is Suresh.
Yes, Suresh.
Yeah, you said, the free time we have 5 GB. Where we can see that here?
You cannot see that here, but you can go to the free tier, right? aws.amazon/free.
Oh, okay. Got it. And one more thing. In reality, consider that I have a small IT company and I would like to use the this S3 as a storage service.
Mm-hmm.
How I can integrate into my IT into this S3 storage service?
Like, it is a very generic question. Well, how you use is like, for example, EC2 instance, for which you certainly cannot use S3, but you have to go for EBS. But let's say there is some data that you always wanted to upload from on-premises to the cloud. You can use S3, or you have some information. Maybe there are, let's say, component 1, okay, application 1, and component 2, application 2. Component 1 will send some data that you wanted to store at a staging area, and component 2 will take that data as an input and process it. So you can find S3 bucket as a staging area. So first server will pump the data into S3 bucket, and second server will receive the data from S3 bucket, and you can process the data. Or you have a web application like Apache or any other application, you wanted to store the logs. You can store the logs into S3. You can move that to Glacier or infrequently access based on the lifecycle policy that you wanted to apply. So it depends on the use case that you are in. But so far you understand the technicalities of S3, but use cases, it depends on your environment. Like you saw the disaster recovery, or maybe for big data analytics, or for the log storage. So for long retention data. So any kind of data can be stored in there.
Okay. You mean to say, I have IT and I have server. So if I want to add the storage to the S3, so I cannot do that. So you mean to say only I can put my data into the separately into S3, but I cannot integrate into my server. Like maybe EMC SAN or some other SAN, we can have a lens visibility and we can.
Yeah. So that's the primary difference you need to understand between block level storage, object level storage, and the file level storage. So S3 is an object level storage. You cannot configure S3 as a D drive or E drive into your operating system.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Oh, got it. So just like we can store the data separately based on
Right.
our requirement. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
However, you can make API calls inside EC2 instance, inside your operating system. You still can read the data from S3 storage.
Oh, okay.
So Venkat, here HTTP port. So can I use this HTTP port as FTP? Say I can share with convert as FTP.
No, you cannot convert this into FTP. It can be either HTTP or HTTPS.
Okay.
Any other questions? Well, then, thank you for joining me today, and I'll see you tomorrow with VPC. It's going to be one of the networking feature. Of course, it's not one of the. It's the networking service in Amazon Cloud. So that will be again. The networking classes would go for 2 days. The first day it will be more of introduction and going over
Venkat,
very basic administrative. Yeah. Hello.
So can I use this S3 in the inside of the Linux host, and can I map with that in EC2 instance?
So map as in what? So I said you cannot map this as a file share nor as a logical partition. Right. This is an object level storage. Right. You cannot map it like an NFS store that you mount to your Linux operating system. You cannot do that way.
Okay.
Okay. However, using that URL that we saw for a bucket, you will get an URL.
Yeah.
For an object, you will get an URL. So using that URL, you can read the data from the operating system and you can write the data from the operating system.
Okay.
Hey, Venkat, about Glacier, do we pay for it, or I mean, of course we pay for it. I mean, do we create a Glacier, or is it like they just dump the data? Is it like our own private or anything? I'm talking about like PCI compliance and stuff like that. Like we are supposed to keep like for 7 years data for 7 years. So if I'm putting it in Glacier,
it is PCI compliant. Yes, it is. There is a separate Glacier management console available at the dashboard. If you go to in the storage category, so you can directly upload the data into Glacier, or you just upload into S3 and then write policies to archive the data into it. So either way it's possible.
If I write the policies, I'll be just paying, and I don't need to worry about maintaining the Glacier, doing anything about that. It'll
Right.
be just, it could be shared with other users, or I don't know how it would be. I should be just paying and making sure that my data is there.
It cannot be shared with others because it is an archival storage. So if you wanted to retrieve any file, it takes minimum 3 to 5 hours of time, and there is a retrieval cost as well.
Oh no,
So-
I mean not the data shared. I mean the space, the Glacier itself.
It is.
I mean,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
yeah, it's not dedicated for my organization. It is.
No.
It's somewhere there. Okay.
Right. It is being shared, but it is PCI compliant.
My data is not compromised, but the space where we are storing the data
Is shared. Right.
okay. Thanks.
Yep. Thank you then. I'll see you tomorrow with VPC.